everyone. I am Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are the co-owners of Avaya University. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. In this event, we're talking with some really incredible fellow experts. We're talking with therapists, psychologists, doctors, and more. And they're here to help provide you with tools and strategies, exercises, techniques to help you experience greater happiness, peace, and joy in your life. Today, our guest is going to talk about a very exciting topic. I can't wait for this. So it's called the codependent empath and negative feeling states. So please welcome Stacy Hoch. Hi, Stacy.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks so much for saying yes. And I want to tell everyone a little bit about you, Stacy, and then we'll dive in. So Stacy is a reformed psychotherapist turned life coach, helping codependent empaths all over the world to dissolve generationally inherited trauma so that they can heal, love, and trust themselves. She is also the author of a book called Imperfectly Sane, which I love. That's an awesome title. And she's a columnist, a partner, and a rebel, but foremost, she is a mama. So gosh, one of our first interactions was you're a mother of 4. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Of varying ages, right? You said you have a baby as well as a teenager, so you're getting the full gamut.
Yeah, I did it well. I have 2 sets in 2 different age groups.
Oh, that's awesome. So I would love it if you have so many different things that you're doing and so many topics that we can dive into as it relates to anxiety and depression. But I'd love it if you'd first just kind of share a little bit about how you got into doing the work that you do today.
I fell down the rabbit hole, I suppose would be the answer to that. But I come from a very abusive lineage. And if you look at this particular archetype, the way that I look at this, and I think like every codependent is a watered down version of these 2 archetypes, which is the narcissist and the codependent. Okay. Mm-hmm. My mother was incredibly codependent, but what was true, she was legitimately classically a narcissist, right? So she's berated so clearly to me that I go, every codependent literally is a narcissist and every narcissist is a codependent. Mm-hmm. It was so clear to me, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was going on, but I knew it wasn't normal. Like normal people grow up and they're like, oh, I don't understand why you have a problem with boundaries, or, there's a different reality in that spectrum, that paradigm. And I kind of fell into the flip-flop of the paradigm as a kid. Like I would be what people wanted me to be, and then I would rebel against that. And then I went to 7th grade and for the first time, my teacher saw me. She saw me, actually saw me, right? And I was like an asshole at that time. I was in my nobody's telling me what to do, fuck you all, nobody gets it. And she let me be there and saw me. She really saw me. And so, of course, at the time, I wanted to be an English teacher, so I could have the impact on the world that she had on me. And at that time, I was totally playing small in that thought. I just want to be like Miss Owens. I just want to show people that I see them. So of course, I became a therapist and a writer and a professor because I wanted to teach. I still wanted to do what Miss Owens did, but I became all of these things on a much larger scale. And the story that I wanted to just share with the world and reflect was the story that would have, I'm going to cry, this is weird, that would have made Miss Owens proud. I wanted to be the person in the world that saw people when people couldn't, they weren't showing up or couldn't see themselves. And it took me years, even as a therapist, to recognize, somebody said to me once, if you could just see yourself the way that the world sees you, you'd be totally fine. And even though I was trying to figure out everybody else, I had to turn all of that energy around on myself and really take a look. Even if you're self-aware and introspective, there's still some aspect of I can see what's going on in everybody else's field, but what's really going on here? And the tension of turning that around and looking at myself and going, holy shit, I get it. It kind of, I went down the rabbit hole of okay, I'm going to use the terms codependent empath because there is a paradigm or a frequency that I can see that this is a spectrum, right? So if you are an empath coming into the world and you're being raised by a narcissist or codependent, you're flip-flopping because both of them are all or none thinking, right? So you're going, okay, I'm flip-flopping all over the place. And I just realized that there's so many of us who want to be okay, well, I'm an empath and I'm a codependent, and we we hate the narcissist and we're wondering why we're attracted to a narcissist. And it's because that's the polar opposite of what's going on inside of us. So if we can come to center, which I had to do, and it's fucking like you want to throw a temper tantrum. It makes me want to rebel the same way that I did when Miss Owens was seeing me, but I still can see myself through that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I want to be the person for the world that I can go, hey, I see what you see, and there's another way to see this. But I'll get in there with you to show you that you can kind of unhook from that paradigm that's running your life, because it doesn't have to be there. There's so many games in the world, and that's one spectrum. It's like the narcissistic codependent spectrum. There's like the entrepreneur game, and there's the family game, and there's like the normal people life game or the football game. Mm-hmm. And we're not used to that, right? We have these like ping pong things going on inside of us. So I just want to help people come to center, and I want to see them in their center. Mm-hmm. So
I love it.
Miss Owens started that whole train for me.
That's awesome. Well, there's so much truth in that we are all both, right, that codependent and narcissistic. I remember when we did our Overcoming Codependency event a while back, because codependency has always been something I struggled with, and had the alcoholic father and the codependent mother and all that modeling and stuff. And I remember during that event, I'm like, wait a second, like I see all these other tendencies that are narcissistic in me, right? I see the selfishness, I see it's all for me, it's all me. And then I see it was very interesting to get that. And I don't think a lot of people talk about it, right? As we have both of these things. We are both of these things. Maybe we're like, expressing one more than the other, but that, yeah. So anyway.
Well, let me put it this way. So I was trying to explain to somebody yesterday that I was working with. He was talking about how he really needs everyone in his life to wake up and show up and be safe so he can be safe in the world, right? Like we have this tendency, just show up. Like I see you in there, come out and play with me. And they're like, no, I'm not coming out and playing with you. It's a little overwhelming that you like need me to do that for you, right? And it's that desire to almost like fill in the world with all of his essence and go like, hey, there's color in the world, that people are actually turned off by. Like normal people with healthy boundaries are like, you stay right there. I'm a sovereign person. I don't need you to come in. And in that way, and we all do this. Every codependent does this. I need you to make me feel safe so I can come out. Mm-hmm. That is where we're narcissistic, in the sense that we're going, I need you.
Yes.
First of all, I need you to do anything at all.
Yep.
We don't need them to do that. We need to do that. So again, it's like pulling that tension back and going, okay, let me look at in what ways I am being the thing that I'm saying I'm not being the thing I say that they should be for myself.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's so true. So, okay. So we have this codependency conversation going on, and a lot of people watching might identify also as being someone who's codependent. So how can we tie this into anxiety and depression, right? Anxiety and depression are two things. Often people struggle with both of them at the same time, and very common these days. What's your take on like the parallels between being someone who's codependent or a codependent empath and someone who's struggling with anxiety and depression?
Well, anxiety and depression are insane amounts of cognitive dissonance, right? So if you're a codependent, you were probably raised without a healthy sense of self, right? Mm-hmm. You look out and you go, okay, they have a sense of self. They have a sense of self. I can feel their self. So I'm going to try to be like that self, but you're not really allowed to activate your will in the world. It's like, if you have a need or a preference, it's like, you shouldn't have that need because look at your father, like, right? You don't want to mess with your father right now because maybe, he'll get too drunk or whatever. Like there's some sense of you have to hide. And then there's this simultaneous vibration of going, I came here to be seen. So we live in the gaps almost of where we're hiding and that sensation of desire to be seen. And that creates such cognitive dissonance. And then we're depressed. Because we've literally depressed our true sense of self, and then we're anxious because we don't think we're allowed to come out, right? So there is this gap of energy, this like void of energy between our desire and where we're hiding, and we're not actually connected in the space between that. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I love that. I was very curious like how we were going to tie this all together. So that makes perfect sense. Yes. Right. As codependents, we are depressing who we are. Right. I always think of, right, the walking on eggshells experience like that I had as a kid around my dad, and like and also, right, like my mom would be walking on eggshells. And so, right, not only was I walking on the eggshells because of him and his drinking, but then she was, and she would show me how to behave as a small child. And so yeah, the depression of, right, joy, happiness, like being a child who's rambunctious, all those kinds of things. And right, I can see how that like ties into then anxiety as well. So do you see people like, I guess next question would be empath. So let's talk a little bit about that. What is that for people who don't understand what an empath is, and how can we tie that also into this conversation of anxiety and depression?
An empath is somebody who literally takes on the feeling states of other people. Okay, so a healthy empath would be able to have compassion enough to go, okay, I will hold you. This is where the codependent part comes in, right? So as a codependent and an empath, which can be a very dangerous breed, somebody else is coming to me and they have this insane feeling state. And because I'm codependent, I want to help them. And that really is a narcissistic desire to not actually feel uncomfortable in the feeling state that they're in, because I myself at one point have rejected feeling that way, right? Or I've been told, if you feel that way, reject it, go to your room, don't feel that way. So as the codependent, I'm going, hey, I feel that you're feeling that way that you're not allowed to feel. My mom told me we're not allowed to feel that way. We can't feel that way because it's dangerous. So let me help you, because you're putting us in danger by having that experience and that feeling. And then the person would, if they're like, depending on what kind of energetic person they are, they might dump and then feel reprieve. And then an empath, if you're depending on what kind of empath you are, I am a mirror empath, but I'm also very bodily. I might come home with like, oh my God, my heart, like my physical heart is breaking right now if somebody was having like a heartbreak that day. And that shit can stay in the body. So a healthy empath would be able to say, I'm aware of that feeling and I'll witness you there. I'm not going to fix it. I don't have to change it. You're okay. So somebody else, let me put it in this context. Somebody else recently said that one of the things that I said in a different summit summed up better in 20 years of codependent work, anything that she'd ever experienced about being a codependent. No, it was this. My daughter got a huge splinter in her foot for 2 days. It was like trauma in the house trying to get it out. She wouldn't let us do it. I had to take her to the hospital. It was enormous. And they told her that she would be a superhero, and they put her in a cape. And that cape was actually her prison. That's what they held her down with, but they tricked her into getting into it. Okay. So me, I'm like, oh, this is like rageful, but I understand why they're doing it. Right. And then I have to hold her down, and there's like 5 people holding her down. Okay. She's 3. She is screaming. She's going, Mom, you're going to throw up. Like, this is how, like, she has a very sensitive body. And then she was screaming, like, they're hurting me, blah, blah, blah. And I had to look at her, like, I went to this place of frantic, like, just get off of her. Let's just let her go. And then I was like, okay, you're teaching her it's not okay to feel this sensation. And to the soul, all of the sensations are sensational, right? That sensation might suck. We might deem it and go, that's negative. This sucks. This is bad on a survival level. But to the soul, I had to witness her and go, damn girl, okay, you're doing it. I'm right here with you. I can't take away your pain. I wouldn't, even if I could at this point, knowing that like you can't go through childbirth and natural labor and not feel the benefit of like, okay, I did that. That was my pain, which led to my product. And when we as codependents take on that energy, we're robbing somebody of their own experience. So yeah.
Wow. That's quite the example. And it reminds me of, yes, our when she was 2, when Ava was 2, Ike's daughter, my stepdaughter, yeah, she had a horrible like accident with her tooth, and it, fell, jammed up into her, like, and then they had, like the holding down thing. That's what I was reminded of, right? That's the holding. Oh, like when you, so yeah, that's pretty amazing. That's a great example of, right, something pretty traumatic and profound, and still witnessing that, right, that codependent tendency to not want, obviously, your child to be in pain. And yet at the same time, right, we are all here going to experience some level of pain in our life. So,
And then
yeah.
she got up like a woman who had just given birth. Like she got up and was like, that wasn't so bad.
Right.
After literally like 2 days of being insane. So she got to feel that, okay, I was allowed to feel it. You witnessed me feel it. It was mine. You didn't take it from me. You didn't try to make it about you by getting upset for me, right? Because like I wanted to be like, doctor, see me. Like I'm upset for my daughter. Do something for me too, right? And it was like, no, she's the person right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see her through that. I could just see her through it. And I could be there for her instead of trying to take it on.
Right.
And about me in any way.
That's awesome. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. So what about like, let's talk a little bit about epigenetics, because I know that's another big part of your work. First of all, what is that for people who don't know what epigenetics is, and how can this, once again, tying it back into people struggling with anxiety and depression, how can this affect that?
Okay. So epigenetics is this idea. It's a theory, but there's science behind it and I believe it with every fiber of all of my being. So I wouldn't be like out there sharing this if I didn't think at minimum, even if it wasn't true and it was the placebo effect, which I don't believe, it's empowering to look at it in this context. So epigenetics is the theory that actually nurture changes nature. So if you put a cell in a very specific kind of situation, it's going to have an effect on the cell, versus if you put it in a dangerous situation, it's going to have a different effect on the cell. So epigenetics is important to me because I am, first of all, came into the planet required to be an empath, but I came in with a really disastrous lineage. And the stories that come through, so basically it goes like this: if you don't rewrite the story in the cell, it's going to just bleed through bloodlines forever. And you're just going to keep acting out other people's stories, right? So epigenetics says, if my grandmother and my grandfather went through this particular thing, and they didn't resolve the issue, I'm going to be feeling the unresolution of that issue. And I'm going to actually be acting it out in my life unconsciously just to resolve it in the DNA. So I don't want to do that because my lineage was pretty shitty. And I came in to be like, all right, I got to stop this. And it's a lot of hard work to center and be sovereign from a lineage of like insanity. But the good news is if you come from a lineage where the bloodline is very negative, so you have stories, like I have stories that mimic my mother's life, mirror my mother's life, that we never knew about, because it's in ourselves to have the unresolved experience. She's still not resolving them, right? So I look at that and I go, damn, she not only like talked to her father's girlfriends on their behalf, and I did that. There's so many parallels that were secrets, right? Like nobody knew about them, but they were not secrets to the cells. And the cells were acting them out. And we have to kind of get in the story to say we're done with the story, because epigenetics is, I believe that even sometimes I'm having flashbacks of my grandmother's experiences on an energetic level. And I can use her as a symbol and say, like, I remember this particular thing of this happening to me in her flesh. Even if it's not her flesh, it's in my body. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we're coming in with possibly a predisposition to be anxious and depressed because we're picking up on the unresolved issues of our deceased ancestors or our living ancestors, which sometimes makes it even harder to do the work.
So how do we differentiate, right? How do you, right? You said it takes a lot of hard work. Like, how do you become aware of what's yours, right, as this sovereign being versus someone else's in your lineage? Or like, how do you
it's all yours. If it comes to you, it's all yours, right? So I can say, okay, this is my grandmother, which is true, but it's come through me, so it's mine. So when we even talk about like, and this is why the back and forth with the codependent empath is an important conversation, because if I go, okay, that's not mine, it might be true. Okay, I can pick up on some people's things and be like, this isn't mine. But what's true is it came to me. So if I don't claim it as my own and own it and love it as if it was my own, and I reject it, that's the thing with anxiety and depression. right? We go, I can't go down that rabbit hole because my God, I'm going to stay there forever. Or I can't feel this way because ... And we try to get rid of the sensation. We try to get rid of the feeling instead of allowing the feeling. And it's in the getting rid of it that perpetuates the story of good and evil, right? We're like, I can't have this. So if it's coming to me, and if I go, I'm uncomfortable with the way you're feeling because I don't like that feeling, it's still my feeling. So even if I'm empathing with somebody, it's still mine. So if I'm going to change, and that's the only place we can change from. We can't change from going, oh, I'm getting rid of the narcissist in my life. It's like, no, that's your narcissist. Okay. That's yours. You owned it. And if you don't own it and keep rejecting it, you're just going to find another one.
Right.
Or whatever it is, that there's a million contexts that we could use that same idea for. But if it comes, it's mine at minimum to own so I can transform it, because you can't change what you don't accept.
Awesome. Thank you. I love that. So what about, we talked about many things, codependency, empaths, epigenetics, how it all relates to anxiety and depression. How about self-love, right? For me personally, I think self-love is probably the most crucial thing in the world, because if we don't love ourselves, it's really not going to work out for us as far as like loving other people. So much comes out of loving ourselves, relationships, health, like all of it. So what's your take on self-love, its importance, and how might that also relate to anxiety and depression?
So if you don't have a self to love, it's very hard to love yourself. So that's when you're going to be in a state of anxiety or depression, because you're going to be in a state of cognitive dissonance, and you're not going to be in integrity with the self, in the sense that if you have a self, you have stepped in and embodied your physical channel, and you know the edges of where that is, right? And I mean this in a sense of character. Like, we literally, especially as a codependent empath, we have to formulate an ego. So we can't, a lot of people are going, I'm codependent and I'm trying to transcend the ego. You don't have a fucking ego. That's the problem, right? Like, you're running on everybody else's ego and going, oh, this is how it's done because I was either raised in the codependent narcissistic paradigm or whatever. We're trying to acquiesce to everybody else's ego instead of condensing and going, actually, I need to get here. I need to establish preferences. I need to know what I like, right? And I need to be allowed to like what I like. And I need to be allowed to feel how I feel. And that allowance has to come from me. And a lot of codependent empaths are like, you have to allow me, or I need my mom to do this. You have to do it, and then your mom will do it. It's just true. It's so true. Like, the mirror is really good to work with. When you do it, they'll do it. But you can't do it because you're waiting for them to do it. What was your question? I digressed.
We were just talking about self-love, the importance of self-love.
Yes. So we have to love the capital S self, not the lowercase s self, because what we have to actually do is formulate the lowercase s self. We have to formulate the identity and go, yes, I am this title, this title, this title. And a lot of us get really tripped up because we don't want to play roles, because we got really mad at people for just playing roles and being like zombified fake people behind those roles. But we have to adapt to the roles that we want to play in the world and use them to formulate an edge, and let that be our ego. And then when we have an ego, we can objectively, with the capital S self, look down or look into the ego and go, yeah, that's just like the edges of her physical existence. She has to stay there to stay centered, right? And the ego is malleable. You could change it if you wanted to, but you have to formulate an ego of a lowercase self before you can transcend it with a capital S self, to just look down on it objectively and love it. So it's not going to be, self-love is not like, I'm going to get a pedicure. Self-love is, I can look at myself in all of my shadowy parts and all of my totality, and I can say, that's you, I accept you, and I love you. And actually, you don't have to change at all for my love. So a lot of codependents are on this road of like, I have to change. And we're doing the same thing that the narcissist did to us by doing that. So when you can look at the self, the lowercase self, from the objective capital S self, and say, you don't have to change at all to earn my love. you're going to have a child inside of you that's an ego that's so willing to change on behalf of you simply because you say, you don't have to do anything to earn my love. And they're going to go, really? Okay, well, now I want to please you because, like, that's amazing. I waited my whole life for you. You're the thing you've been waiting for. That capital S self is the thing that you've been waiting for. But a lot of us, we're in this headspace and we're not grounded enough to formulate the edges of a true identity and own all of it, right? Like it's like, oh, I shouldn't. There's a lot of shoulds and shouldn't. We have to just own it. We have to own the identity that we choose to take on. And then we can actually love ourselves from an objective reality, looking at ourselves. Well, first, we need a self.
Right. Cool. Yeah, no, I love that. That's awesome. And I can totally see how that can relate to people, right? Struggling with anxiety and depression if they've, once again, like you said, depressed who they are and depressed their ego, identity, preferences, etc. You know, how that could link back to what they're, you know, struggling with right now with, you know, today. So,
well, if you also think of it like this, I've never thought of it like this before, but it is, anxiety and depression are the flip side of the same coin. And you're going to be depressed until you reach this like middle ground where then you're like, oh, I'm coming out and now I'm anxious because I don't know how much I'm allowed to come out. So if you're anxious, that's good because it means you're getting closer to your edge. But if you're depressed, it means you're doing the same normal thing that you've been doing, which is hiding the entire time, right? So
yeah, I love that. That's awesome. I know one of my good friends, she always used to tell me that like, what was it? Fear or anxiety, whatever you want to look at it, is just excitement in disguise. Now, for people struggling like severe anxiety, I am not trying to downplay anything, but that's something that I often look to when I come to like this experience of being anxious and fluttery and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, oh wow, like, okay, like got it. Like in this moment, I'm actually like looking at it from a level of excitement. And then when I kind of flip that in my mind, it's like, oh, okay. Like it puts an empowering spin on it as opposed to the label, right, of being anxious and all that. So
I have a different spin also because it might be true, but it's also true that like I don't experience it as excitement. I'm like, oh, this is anxiety. And I invite you in. You see how much power the self has? Instead of going, oh, this is excitement, we're almost like lying to ourselves and tricking ourselves. For me, maybe sometimes that would work because I would genuinely feel it, but other times it wouldn't work. But what would work is me going, I invite you in because I'm in charge.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. No, awesome. And anyone watching right now, like whatever your experience is your experience. So it's just ultimately figuring out what works for you in that moment. Does it work for you to, yes, flip flop into, oh, wow, I'm actually really excited. Or are you truly, yeah, like come on in and, you know, dip your foot in and see where you're at as far as, you know, anxiety and depression and don't depress that feeling. So awesome. I love it. So we're running a little low on time, Stacy. I want to make sure you get a chance to talk about a free gift you have for everybody. So everyone, there's a button below this video that takes you over to Stacy's website. So what is this free gift you have?
It is a PDF free must gets for empaths. And honestly, that's all I'm going to say about it.
We'll leave you on the edge, everybody. So you can go check it out. Again, the button's right below. You just click through and get that free PDF from Stacy. Are there any last insights? Anything else that you want to put out there to tie all of what we've been talking about together?
I don't think so.
Well, thank you.
Do you have anything that you want to say to tie it all together?
I guess like, you know, if people watching right now, I'd imagine people who tune into this class, like might identify with being an empath or being codependent. I think that I just recommend you really take a look at the links between, your history, your family history, all the things that have made you who you are today. And how is that affecting your mental state today, right? How's that affecting anxiety for you, depression for you? And I think there's a lot of empowerment that comes into linking things together. That's kind of what, like the overall gist of all of what you've said today. There's so many ways we can look at ourselves and our minds and our experiences and start like, you know, drawing lines and connecting the dots. So I just encourage you to do that.
I encourage you to do that too.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Stacy. Really appreciate you and your work. And I love how passionate you are about it and all the people that you're helping. So thank you so much for doing what you do.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks everyone for showing up for yourself today, for being here for yourself. If you are someone who's codependent, then you are on your way in the world of healing because you're here. We're here for you right now to help you learn about this stuff as it relates to anxiety and depression. And we'll see you in the next class. Thanks everybody.
Bye everyone.
Hey everyone, I just wrapped up another great class with Stacy Hoch. We talked about the codependent empath and negative feeling states. So I love this topic. As I mentioned in this class, codependency is a very passionate subject of mine because I am let's call it a recovering codependent, always forever aware of all of my codependent tendencies. And so I hope that you got a lot out of this if that's something that you're also struggling with. And I really loved how we tied all this together into the conversation of anxiety and depression. So, right, we talked about, right, all of the connections and connecting the dots between epigenetics, right, things that you have brought with you in your tissues, in your cells from your lineage and all of that kind of stuff, and how that can affect your mental health today, right? Anxiety and depression, thinking about like all the scarcity and anxiety that came from, let's say, our grandparents, depending on your generation, grandparents growing up in the depression time of the world, and how that has affected you in your life. At least that was my experience of my generation. So a couple of big take-home messages are, right, if you identify as someone who's codependent, it's you don't have a healthy sense of self, right? For whatever reason, whatever scenario you grew up in, whatever modeling you had, whatever it was, you don't have a healthy sense of self, and that enables you to hide, right? But what Stacy was talking about was you came here to be seen, right? So what you're doing is hiding because of this codependency, but what you came here to do in this world is to be seen. So obviously there's going to be a big disconnect there, which creates depression because you're literally depressing who you are. You're depressing potentially emotions, ways of expressing yourself, all sorts of passions, who knows? So you're depressing these things because of this codependent nature and this not having a healthy sense of self. And you might feel anxious because you want to come out and play, right? You want to come out and play in this world, but you're anxious because you have told yourself, right, that you need to keep things depressed. So a couple of other things here were epigenetics. So we talked about that, about the concept of nurture changes nature, right? And she mentioned that if you don't rewrite the story in your cells, it will bleed through bloodlines. So if this is something that is an interesting topic to you, I highly recommend you diving deeper into it because, right, what are you doing today in your life that stays in your cells that will bleed into the next generation if you don't rewrite that story? That's definitely something to take a look at, and a whole other level of one's journey with anxiety and depression, right? How is it going to affect others and the next generation? So really important stuff. We also talked about self-love. I really love her take on self-love. And she mentioned that if you don't have a self to love, right, as many codependents do not, it is hard to love yourself, right? Because you're always in this state of what she called cognitive dissonance. So because you don't know the edges of where, right, your personality ends and someone else's begins, it's really hard to love yourself because you don't know who you are. So another thing she mentioned about that is you don't have to change it all for me to love you. So that is the place you're trying to get to, is like totally 100% acceptance of yourself, your negatives, your positive, your strengths, your weaknesses, your shadow, your light, all of those things. You don't have to change it all for you to love you. So all really amazing things. I hope that you found this super helpful, whether you're codependent or maybe you're not, or you're empathic. Obviously, if you're tuning in, you're probably struggling with either anxiety or depression. So I really hope that these tie-togethers of codependency, being an empath, helped you in your journey today. And at the very least, if you don't identify with that, it helps you potentially make you aware of other things that have affected you in your journey. right? Whether that's your family history or whatever, that have led to feelings of anxiety and depression today. So awesome. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.